Hi, Tracy. Hi, Bill.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good.
Just waiting to see if folks can't get in. Hopefully it all works for most people.
Yeah. Piece of cake.
Hi.
Hi, Jess.
Hey.
How's everybody?
Good. How are you? Hi, Diane.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Or I'm here. Perfect. Kim, I'll let you give a brief welcome if you'd like to, and then we'll pass it over to Jess to just give a brief overview of some of the items that we discussed last month regarding, just making sure that we are following guidelines for open meetings and open records. And then we'll jump into the meat of our conversation today.
Great. Thank you all for joining. I hope you're all doing well. I appreciate you all being able to get on, and sorry for, sometimes it can be confusing to have the individual panelist links, but this is how we had to figure out how to do it via Zoom webinar in order to provide that public listening option for folks as well. So thank you all for coming. But if you do have any problems or technical difficulties, please feel free to email me or chat me throughout. And going forward, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions in the interim between meetings, or you can't find your link or can't find the reading materials or anything like that. Please just let me know. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess Lowry.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Jess Lowry. I'm a Senior Assistant Attorney General, and I am your counsel for this task force. So I just wanted to close the loop on a couple of things that we talked about last month. The first one was related to open meetings, and you all had asked whether it was possible for two of you to be at a meeting of another group where you were soliciting comments that wasn't a public meeting. And I'm gonna reiterate what I said I thought was true then, which was, if two of you are at a meeting, it needs to be public. So if you wanted to solicit comment from one of your other groups, just make sure it's only one of you there at a time. The second issue had to do with conflicts for, if any of you had any conflicts that would prevent you from being on this task force. And after doing some research, my recommendation is that I don't think any of you have conflicts that would prevent you from being on this task force. We talked about folks who were engineers or architects, or anybody who might down the road, their business might benefit from the ultimate recommendation or the ultimate standards that are adopted by the Air Commission. And we talked about people who own buildings that might be subject to those regulations. And my conclusion is that is not a direct enough benefit or detriment from the work that you're doing here that would prevent you from being on this committee. Anybody who might get more business, so would anybody else, like we talked about in that area. And the folks that own the buildings that would be subject to these regulations, first of all, this task force isn't actually adopting regulations. And second of all, the statute that created this task force specifically asked for people who are owning those buildings. So that's my conclusion. If you have any questions about that, I would ask you to contact me separately. We were thinking about going into executive session so I could answer questions today, but we couldn't figure out that technology. So please just contact me separately, and I'm happy to talk to you about my analysis and how I reached that conclusion. But what I would like to do, part of the analysis is to ensure that everybody knows where everybody else is coming from, right? And what particular interests they're bringing to the table, and what particular, business they might be representing. So what I would, and if everybody knows where everybody else is coming from, then you can understand each other's bias and sort of weigh each other's opinions appropriately. So what Julie has just put in the chat is what I would like you to do. I'd like to kind of go around and do another round of introductions, which is probably helpful since you you all don't know each other that well yet, and say, you know, what your business is or what business you represent, and then also specifically which category in the task force statute you are representing. And would that be helpful to provide that list to everybody?
Yeah, we can pop it up on the screen share really quick if that might be easiest.
And then lastly, you know, just in your own words, explain, you know, why you think you can be unbiased in this task force. And just, you know, 1 or 2 sentences is fine. There you go. That shows you what category each of you represent. So
yeah, a little bit of a cheat sheet there.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And maybe we can just go in order of the folks on that list, starting with Mr. Hartman.
So Jim Hartman here. I was originally an architect and have been doing all electric buildings, turning vacant buildings into all electric new housing and commercial buildings in recent years, as well as some solar power, net metered and community solar developments for the last several years. And I think I can be unbiased just because we're mostly going to be retired soon, and just listening into other folks doing stuff. So thanks for the opportunity.
I think that makes me next. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Barsner. I am the Executive Director for NAIOP Colorado, which is the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. We represent owners, developers, and investors in commercial real estate, as well as other related folks, attorneys, brokers, et cetera, et cetera. As I am not a direct owner, I merely represent them. I don't feel that I would have any sort of a conflict.
Hi, my name is John Lauer. I'm with Newmark, and I represent building operating engineers on the commercial side. I think similar to Kathy, I represent ownerships or management companies. And I'm kind of the end, you know, once something is decided on some of these energy strategies, I'm the one that has to make sure they get implemented. So I feel that I can be completely unbiased, absolutely.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stacy Bumgarn. I work up at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado as the Campus Energy Coordinator. I work on our energy conservation efforts here. My spot on this list is representing multifamily residential covered buildings. And of course, that might seem like a strange fit to some, but we have a bunch of residence halls. But more so than residence halls, we have a number of university apartments and multifamily properties that are, you know, lived year round by our graduate students, international students, married students, on and on. So anyway, I'm not even exactly an owner. I'm just a person who works at the university and watches all of our energy consumption and conservation efforts. But happy to be here. Thanks much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nari Boyd, and I'm the director for the Boulder County Housing Authority. And I can be unbiased because I don't have any trade representative affiliations, and I'm representing residents of low-income housing multifamily properties. Also work with a lot of small landlords who have voucher holders, Section 8 voucher holders. So I'm representing the low-income housing community on the rental side. And we also work with low-income home buyers as well. So just trying to represent the affordable housing community. And we own a number of multifamily properties throughout Boulder County. Thanks.
Do we have Michael on the call today? Michael Gifford?
Here,
Okay.
so we can skip him.
All right. Cecil, you're up
Here's
next.
here.
Yeah, this is Michael. Sorry, I had a technical difficulty, but I am here. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. Go ahead. Michael, we're just doing a quick introduction again of your name and your employer or business and which category on the task force that you represent.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael Gifford, President and CEO of Associated General Contractors, Colorado. So we're a statewide association for commercial building general contractors, specialty contractors and suppliers, and representing the construction industry on the task force.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Cecil?
Hello, everybody. Cecil Courtney. I'm a member of Pipe Fitters Local 208. Represent our workers that are, work in the industry, and I think can be unbiased just because it's no matter what the consensus ends up being at the end of this task force. I think we'll have a part of that work, and I think we'll be able to get done whatever needs to get done. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jenny?
Hi, Jenny Gonzalez. I work for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Denver Local Union 68. We represent over 2,000 licensed electricians here in Denver. At this point in time, unbiased position here on the task force, just seeing what we can do to provide a properly trained workforce for the state. Glad to be involved. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Hutton, and I am with Cunningham. We're an international design firm with 6 U.S. offices, 2 overseas offices. We're active in healthcare, education, multifamily housing, hospitality resort, and workplace, a lot of that we do here in Colorado. And so as an architect, I was very involved working with the sponsors of this bill, watched it get formulated and watched the many changes it took on the process along the way. And so I am here representing the American Institute of Architects. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Bill Green, current chairman of the RMH group. We're a 75-person mechanical and electrical engineering firm. We work in higher education, healthcare, aerospace, data centers, federal, military, pretty broad range. I'm also here representing ACEC Colorado. And I think I can be unbiased because I'm really here representing these 260 engineering firms in the state that are part of ACEC Colorado, and looking forward to participating. Thanks.
Joel Danforth, Energy Programs and New Business Director for United Power. I'm here to represent the electric utilities on the panel. And in particular, the medium and small size cooperatives within the state. A lot of the larger utilities are light years ahead of us in terms of at least the benchmarking portion of the law. So we've got some catch up to do, but happy to be here.
Thanks, Joel. And has Christine joined yet, Kim?
She has.
Okay, great.
Christine, you want to go next?
Yeah, sorry for my technical difficulties. I'm still trying to restart my laptop. In the meantime, I'm on my phone. And I'm Christine Brinker with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I work on buildings energy efficiency policy. I've been there since, I don't know, 2004 or so. I am representing environmental and climate issues, and I can be unbiased because after working in the field for this long, I know that such a policy can't succeed and go forward unless it works for all affected stakeholders. That includes building owners, community advocates, labor, and all the other perspectives represented in our group today.
Hello, I'm Kara Carmichael. I'm representing RMI, which is a nonprofit organization like Christie's that's focused on climate change. So I can be unbiased today because I think that our ambitions are directly in line with the intent of the legislation in reducing emissions from buildings. And we have nothing to profit from as a result of this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Manigan. I lead the Buildings and Homes team for Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I represent a local government that has enacted a benchmarking requirement. We also are working to pass a building energy performance ordinance here in Denver. And I can be unbiased, just think I'll bring a perspective to really help us think through how to make sure this policy fits with our local ordinance and really meets the needs of everyone in our community, especially under-resourced buildings and community members.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Hancock, and I work for the city of Aurora, a city of almost 400,000 people. And I am representing a community that has not adopted a benchmarking policy. And as for bias, like most local governments, depends on who's on my council. I know that it's difficult when we have a very purple city. And so I need to understand how this is going to work. And I know there are other communities and staff out there who need to understand how this is going to work. So I'm really looking forward to learning all the perspectives. And I'll just say I'm out in the beautiful East Colfax neighborhood of Denver right now. So if it gets loud, sorry about that, but for reasons I won't go into, I can't be in my house right now. So so anyway, glad to be here. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tracy Phillips. I'm with Sustainable Real Estate Solutions. I have been an energy consultant for about 25 years. Most of my career has been working in the field. So on performance contracting, utility DSM programs, government sponsored programs. I've done a lot of energy modeling, commissioning, measurement and verification, sort of a jack of all trades in terms of energy. The last 5 years, I've been the director of the Colorado CPACE program. So I've sort of switched gears and working to help get the projects I used to develop financed so things can actually get done. I'm definitely unbiased. The only bias I have is towards the Avalanche. I want them to win the Stanley Cup, but otherwise I am unbiased. So there you go.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. Is Bill Martin on the call today?
I am. Thank you. I was trying to figure out how this all worked and who was going next. So thank you for calling me out. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Martin. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate and Construction for Centura Health System. I can be unbiased in this process because obviously we want to figure out a solution that works for all going forward as relates to building performance and solutions to energy. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. And Kirk, last but not least.
Hi, thanks everybody. Kirk Longstein. I work with Fort Collins Utilities in the city of Fort Collins. I currently manage a benchmarking program here up in the city of Fort Collins. And I wear two different hats. I'm managing our code and enforcement of the code, and I'm also work on the utility side. And so I'm also in a position where I need to solve some of the data access issues that some of our building owners encounter. In my position, I advocate for the public good, and I would say I'm biased probably towards small to medium businesses, and a majority of our building stock here are smaller buildings. So I think that's the perspective that I'll be bringing.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, everyone. And we did not miss anyone, right? I think we'll want to go through really quick on the CEO and consultant team side to make sure that we've introduced all those folks as well. But in terms of task force members, I think we should have gotten everyone. Perfect. So I'll pass it over, I think, first to Kim, and then Will, I see you on the call, and Crystal, Kate, and then we'll do the Iconergy team, and then lastly, the Lotus team.
Thanks. Well, I'll pass it over to Will Tour since Crystal and I have already introduced ourselves.
Perfect. Thanks.
Hey, Will Tour, Executive Director of the Energy Office. Great to see everyone today. And just to apologize in advance, in about 10 minutes, I have to run to a legislative committee meeting, and will rejoin when I can.
Thanks, Will.
Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Kate Townley. I'm a built environment specialist at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So I'm a non-voting member here to support the task force, and I will also be sharing those duties with Clay Clark from our climate change unit. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, and to clarify, Kim, Crystal, Will, and Kate, as well as obviously Jeff and Maria from Iconergy, and myself and Diane are non-voting members of the task force, but we're here to support you and to provide, answers to questions as needed and everything. So I'll pass it over to Jeff, and then Maria, and then Diane.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Gaida. I'm with Iconergy. I specialize in HVAC systems and other energy efficiency measures. And here's a technical resource for supporting your efforts.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I am Maria Agazia. I also work with Iconergy. I'm here mostly for administrative support and to tie into our engineering team and decide who would be the best representative to come to each individual meeting. So I'm here to help take notes and work through the coordination of different meetings. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Was I next?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Ernst. I'm a research associate at Lotus. I work on our communications and public engagement team, and I'm clearly very much in the Denver sun today, so getting a little suntan while we're meeting today. But I will be taking a lot of notes, so you'll see me kind of swiveling my head back and forth, but I'm here to support you all and looking forward to really diving into this work.
Great, thanks, Diane. And I'm Julia Newman also with Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. So I'll be one of your lead facilitators for this conversation and our upcoming ones as well. So really grateful to be working with you all. Jess, is there anything else we wanted to make sure we covered on your end today before we kind of jump in?
Nope, that was great. Thank you all. Thank you all for doing that. Thank you for taking the time to let me come speak with you. I left my number and email in the chat if you have any questions. Seems like you all have a great group and a lot of support, and I look forward to seeing what you accomplish. So good luck, and I will sign off.
All right. Thanks so much, Jess. And of course, feel free to reach out to Jess directly with questions, or to Kim and myself. We can always connect you to Jess as well if there's any questions on specifically on like legal issues related to task force and the work we're doing and the recommendations. And in future meetings, we probably will still start, at least for the next few meetings, with introductions, just so we all remember who's in the group, but we won't need to go into quite so much detail. And maybe we'll just do name and fun fact or something along those lines, so that we can keep getting to know each other a little better, as well as working together. So perfect. I am going to dive right into the meat of our conversation today, and starting with just a little bit of a recap and an overview on our goals and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve here together as a group. So as a reminder, we are here to develop building performance standards that are equitable, low carbon, and clean energy, and that reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions sector-wide, so that's for the building sector, 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030. Ideally, in doing so, we'll develop a process for tracking that will reduce greenhouse gas pollution, lower energy costs for consumers across the state, and improve our indoor air quality and perhaps even outdoor air quality as an additional perk. As we meet together over the coming few months, really more than a few months, 10 months, then just a reminder on our meeting norms. So obviously with Zoom etiquette, we've all been on Zoom for quite a while, but as much as possible, please keep your cameras on so that we can all stay engaged in the conversation. Mute yourself when not speaking, and then know that this is a space where we encourage conversation. So always feel free to interrupt me or Diane or anyone else who might be sharing information at a particular time with a question or comment, or use the raise hand function on Zoom, and we'll make sure that we get to your question or your point that you want to make. There's no bad ideas in this space, and we want to consider all ideas, so please do speak freely and share all of your thoughts. In addition to sharing your thoughts, please do share the space, so we make sure that everyone has a chance to speak throughout the conversations that we'll be having together. Obviously, please be respectful and be present for the conversation. We will have a break during our meeting today, so you'll have a little time to get up and stretch your legs or use the restroom. Or if you need to, check that email. So if you could keep any sort of email or phone use outside of this conversation, regulated to either before or after we meet or during that break time, we'd very much appreciate it. And then you're all here, as we just learned, because you are experts and you really do provide an incredible amount of expertise and insight and perspective from the work that you've all been doing over many, many years. So please do leverage that expertise. And as much as possible, we encourage you to rely on that expertise and not necessarily on your position or your connections. So we're here today to learn what you know, not who you know, really. And then, of course, we also want to consider all viewpoints, including those who may not be represented here in our group today or in future conversations. So as we're meeting, then please, feel free to share, thoughts or perspectives that you may think are important that are not represented or may not have been shared during the conversation otherwise. Our objective for today's conversation is to recap meeting number one, make sure we're all on the same page, so can check that one off the list. And then the next step is that we'll be diving deep into the values that we started to develop at the end of last meeting. So if you remember, we started to identify some different values, or we might even call them like community priorities or statewide priorities for building performance standards. So outside of achieving these sector-based greenhouse gas emissions, what else are we trying to make sure that these BPS do? So we'll take another deep dive looking at those values, and we'll actually be able to turn them into goal statements that will help us to essentially use those goal statements as vetting criteria. So as we look at the building performance standards in future meetings, we can say, okay, which one of these different options we have, which one of these really start to hit at some of these other goals that we're trying to achieve through this work. Moving from there, we'll go into providing an overview of a BPS. So we'll almost back up a little bit and say, what exactly is a BPS? What are we trying to do here? And provide some national and some local examples. We'll talk about how we'll be developing a BPS over the coming meetings, and then provide information on next steps for those coming meetings as well, so you kind of understand how this process will roll. These first two meetings are really, I want to note, a lot of like setting the stage, making sure that we're all on the same page, that we all sort of understand where we're going and how we're going to be working together. Starting with the next meeting in November, we'll really be diving deep into the meat of these conversations around building performance standards, what they are, how we're going to enact them in Colorado, what makes sense, what doesn't, what buildings are covered, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the meeting today. How these future meetings will go, but just know that if you're really itching and eager to dive deep into those conversations, I promise we will get there very soon. Before I go on, any questions on any of that or anything else that I've spoken about very quickly now here in the last couple of minutes? All right. So if you remember back to the end of our last meeting, we did start to discuss some of those values, some of those really important elements that we want to consider as we develop a building performance standards. Lotus took those and actually turned them into kind of grouped them together into 6 different buckets or categories for values. So those are what you're seeing on the screen here right now. We have equity, cost savings, a simple streamlined process, workforce development, engaged and informed community, and reliability. So as we start to dive into the goals that we'll develop as a task force and that we'll use to kind of vet our ultimate building performance standards and the strategies that will be employed, then these are the general groupings that we're going to keep in mind. But we want to make sure that we're not missing anything as well. So we're actually going to switch over to using a Miro board. Some of you may have already played around with this a little bit. And if not, then that's fine. We'll get you in there and get you used to it and accustomed to it. But what we'll be doing is this is an online platform. It's a virtual whiteboarding tool, essentially. So we'll share a link with all of you in the chats that you can get on that Miro board itself. Diane has already thrown that in there. So if you click on that link, then you'll be able to go to that Miro, and then we'll also be screen sharing that Miro as well, just so you can kind of see how we're organizing things. But what we're going to be doing on that board together, that virtual whiteboard, is sharing ideas and then starting to sort them together and develop those goal statements. I don't think we'll get to voting today. We'll actually start the next meeting with that. So I'm going to stop screen sharing here. Diane, I'm going to let you start. And if you want to just kind of go over those things to cover there as people start to dive into the Miro as well.
Great, thanks, Julia. I see you all kind of hopping in there. So let me just share my screen here. Great, let me make sure I can see you all. Perfect. So great. So just some things that make this board a little bit easier to maneuver. So if you can see my pointer up at the top right of your screen. So if I click show collaborators, it gets really kind of all over the place. So if you want to hide other people's mouses, feel free to click that button and you'll only be able to see your own. Another tip is this is going to be your toolbar on the left side here. And in order to move your screen, you'll want the hand tool. So see how this is not blue, or I clicked it and now I have a little hand. This allows you to move around the Miro board, but we'll have, when we start, I'll have it zoomed in on where we'll be talking. But in order to click something, you'll want the mouse tool. So let me zoom in here just a little bit, just so you can see this a little better. So then when you are interacting with some of these squares and post-it notes here, in order to type on it, you just double click and type whatever your idea is. Whoops, can't type. And then you'll want to click off of it. And to drag it around, you just hold down and move it where you'd like it to go. So those are really the only features we'll be using today. And you guys are already getting started. All right, so I'll pass it back over to Julia so she can explain this process, and you guys can get going on the Miro board.
Yeah.
Hey, Diane, can you explain again, how do I get rid of all these floating little
flies
so on my screen?
Yeah, great. On the top right, there's this little mouse button, and you can say show collaborators cursors, or you can turn it off. So when I click it, it'll show everyone. And when I click it again, they all go away.
Got it. Thank you.
It can be really dizzying to have everyone's cursor showing up on your screen. And if you're unable to, if you don't have dual screens, or if you're unable to get on there, that's why we're screen sharing it as well, just so that you can kind of participate either way. If you want to hop into that Miro board and do the typing yourself, then we're happy to have you do that. If you'd rather share ideas in the chat or just verbally, then we will record them and make sure that they get put into the Miro as well. So a couple of different options in terms of how you want to interact with this. Diane, if you could zoom in though, start to zoom in on those blue squares. And I see a bunch of you are already getting started. So if, feel free to like mute me if, if you've already figured out what we're doing here. But basically what we have are we've got those 6 buckets of values that were identified in the last meeting. So everything that was on those sticky notes in the blue squares originally were ideas that you mentioned in the last meeting when we discussed, what are we trying to achieve other than our sector-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals? What else are we trying to do with building performance standards? So under equity, for example, we've got equity with affordable housing, consider tenants and renters, and being sure we're bringing everyone along, providing pathways, et cetera. What we want to do is just make sure that we've got everything included in these lists. So for example, cost, someone added just recently tools to calculate energy and cost savings, which is fantastic. Before that was added, then we just had cost in there. So what are we actually trying to achieve in terms of cost savings? Are we trying to reduce energy burden? Are we trying to ensure that we have the lowest first cost for technology implementation? Are we trying to have the lowest cost differential between current technologies and new technologies, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to stop speaking for a minute, but and let you all add ideas here into this board. If you have questions, then feel free to ask them. If you have, if you're having trouble with the Miro board, but you want to add some ideas, then feel free to chat with me directly or just with the larger group, and we'll make sure that we get those added as well. But I'll give us maybe like 5 minutes to go over to let you add different ideas.
And if anyone's having any technical difficulties, feel free to share your ideas in the chat and we'll make sure that we're captured them there as well.
Absolutely. Getting some really good ideas added here. And I like that someone put over on the side, avoid unintended consequences. That kind of falls into all buckets. That's certainly something we can make sure is included as well. Okay, I'll give you about 2 more minutes. See a lot of ideas still being added. Wow, this is awesome. Just so many ideas coming up here. This is great.
How do we make the blue boxes bigger?
Well, we just stick it outside the box as close as you can at this point, I guess, and we'll
Yeah, and you can stack them. I'm going to move them anyway, so you can put them right on top of one another.
Perfect. Karen, I got your message there, so I'll make sure that that is included.
Can somebody help me understand what was meant by reliability? Is that utility specific, or is there another thought there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was really meant to be mostly utility specific, but we could also just note, reliability in terms of the ability of a building to function as the way it should. I think could also fall under that. Perfect. I think Kathy makes a great point that maybe instead of cost savings, that cost box should just be cost, because we may not always have cost savings associated with it. All right. Looks like we've still got folks adding a couple things, so I'll just give us, one more minute here really quick to get all of our last ideas in. Great. This is fantastic. There are so many good ideas here. So, so our next step is basically turning these different values into goal statements. So some of them I think we might be able to pull down directly. And Diane, if you want to quit screen sharing really quick, and I'll throw up the PowerPoint again really quickly. So some of those I think that we had on there are going to align really easily with just kind of rolling right into a goal statement. Other ones we might need to wordsmith a little bit or finagle one way or another. But as an example, so Diane's kind of on the back end, doing a little bit of sorting there on the board. While she's doing that, then I will pull this up, and this is a very long list, and I apologize, a lot of text here, but the Energized Denver Task Force developed guiding principles. So these are essentially, the ideas that were used to vet different building performance standards, and that were sort of lined up to make sure, as we identify different BPS and different opportunities to enhance efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy across buildings in Colorado, or rather in Denver, what else are we trying to achieve? So you can see in here, there are definitely, a wide variety of guiding principles, and some of them do speak to cost. So we have seek cost-effective strategies on here. We have allow for flexibility with changing circumstances as new clean technologies become cost-effective. We have a lot around equity, obviously. So accounting for disparate climate impacts and historic racial inequities in Denver, and accelerating positive impacts for low income and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities for that clean energy transition. Seeking mutually supportive co-benefits, benefiting local families in Denver's economy by providing robust workforce training. These are all, I think, really important guiding principles to keep in mind. So what we're going to do is take our values that you all just identified and make sure that they actually come out to be statements similar to this, something that is not necessarily quantifiable from the perspective of you can't always put like a number or a rating on it, but you can at the very least say yes or no, it's some way sort of like rank whether or not the different building performance standards will meet those goals. Excuse me. Katrina, I don't want to speak out of turn. So if you wanted to add anything regarding these guiding principles and how you developed them for the Energized Denver Task Force or anything related to that, welcome you to do that.
No, that was a great summary.
Okay, great. Perfect. On that note, Diana, are you ready for us to go into the Miro board again? I can share it if it would be easiest.
Yeah, if that works for you, and then you can zoom in on each section and I'll keep cleaning it up.
Perfect. All right. So, and as a reminder, our overarching goal is to reduce emissions to meet the state's climate goals for the sector, 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030. So I will keep reiterating that as long as as long as we're meeting together. But really what we're, kind of the question we're trying to answer is what's going to be different in the years ahead after we successfully implement a building performance standard in Colorado. So what we have, what Diane has done here is she started to move down some of these different statements that have come up already. And we have, for equity, we've got affordable housing, we've got market rate housing is more challenging than affordable housing. So that's almost like more of a data point, just something that we need to keep in mind. We have ensuring below market rate occupants are informed of the benefits. We have noting that efficiency is low cost, and also reduces total energy, but not necessarily emissions per unit of energy. And then some other statements here as well. So looking at all of these different values that we have, I wonder if there are, and this is something that I'd love to be a little bit more of a conversation, and we can type them out, type these ideas out as we discuss them. But I wonder if there are 1 or 2 or 3 statements or goals that might come to mind that we can kind of wrap all of these different equity related sticky notes into. And some of them might already sort of fall into that space. I almost think this one does, but please go ahead. Yeah, Kirk.
I'm curious if there's a nexus between the occupants that are experiencing a high energy burden and building owners that own and operate those buildings that disproportionately impacted folks are occupying. So there's like 2 value statements here, principles related to the energy burden, and then also issues around the split incentive that I would love to see kind of float to the top here.
Oh yeah, great. Nori, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that from your perspective working with affordable housing.
Sure, I was trying to figure out how you say it, but it is as if the lower income community is more price sensitive to energy burden, utility costs, and so a small incremental change has more of an impact on whether they're stably housed or not. And I'm not sure how to state that that would be one of the goals, because it's just they're more price sensitive, a little goes a long way with a low income household in terms of the utility costs relative to their overall budget for rent and other necessities.
would noting something in a goal statement, something along the lines of reducing energy burden while minimizing the split incentive issue. Maybe there's just a period there, or we could go on and explain, but I tend to be a fan of things that are kind of short and sweet statements, but we can certainly make them as lengthy as they need to.
I think even split incentive is kind of hard to, maybe a lot of folks don't understand that except for us on the call here. So another way of saying it might be something more simplified. Yeah,
that's a great point. And for anyone who is on the call who might not be familiar with that term, split incentive, that's the challenge wherein the benefits and costs of a particular improvement might not go to the same parties. So for example, if a building owner makes a big investment that will save energy, but the tenants are the ones to pay energy bills, then that provides little incentive for the building owner to actually make that investment because they will not see the return on it. So that's kind of what we're talking about with the split incentive issue. So I'm going to make things that can kind of turn into our goal statements a little bit of a different color here. And then I'll just add in here.
Potentially, Julia, I was thinking too, addressing the co-benefits of building owners and occupants experiencing, struggling with an energy burden. So just thinking about their co-benefits that this program offers. Say again, I'm sorry.
Co-benefit sounds better than split incentives. That's great.
Yeah.
Something like that appropriate? Reduce energy burden and enhance the co-benefits to all parties through BPS.
I'd also like to see something that, and maybe we're saying the same thing, but flexible compliance options. That gives us the chance, and somebody spoke to that on what right there, provide pathways for companies, organizations to get that there's options. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah. Does it make sense? I'm almost thinking this one is a goal statement already.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's flexible compliance options, not one size fits all.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and make that one. And just to note, these, we won't necessarily finalize these during our meeting today. What we'll do at the beginning of our next meeting is kind of review these again and make sure we're all in agreement and we're not missing anything. But we want to kind of narrow them down quite a bit. So I think having 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 per each of these buckets will make a lot of sense. Okay, so we have providing pathways for those flexible incentives. We have reducing energy burden. This one I think is maybe important to note. And I think we sort of get it. It's a question of whether we get it affordable housing through this reducing energy burden one, but we might want to have something else around that as well.
And this is Karen. I guess I just want to make sure it's not just about the housing. We have a lot of business owners, BIPOC business owners in Aurora. So this is great for the housing, but it also, a lot of these apply to our commercial and industrial.
That's a great point. So maybe ensure any benefits are distributed among residential and commercial building owners.
And I was thinking, just to use an example, we have a lot of small businesses run by BIPOC community members in a marketplace setting, but they're sub-metered. So that gets, you know, to the commercial part of this, where that, you know, it is definitely a split incentive. And I haven't been able to get any buy-in because of that situation. And it's small businesses in a large format building, a reuse situation.
Great. Anything else we might want to include from an equity standpoint for some goals or guiding principles?
This is Katrina. You might just want to call out some of the co-benefits explicitly. For example, one of the main co-benefits of building electrification identified through our Energize Denver process was improved health and safety, because we know that 30 to 40% of gas equipment in low-income homes today is leaking carbon monoxide, and 95% of those homes don't have carbon monoxide detectors. And so, you know, to the extent this can incentivize that sort of solution, I think there's real health and safety benefits. And there's probably other co-benefits also, but that was a primary one, in addition to reduced energy burden that came out through our process.
Great, great. Thank you, Katrina.
Julia, that one around energy burden is really seeming to kind of focus around tenants. And I wondered if we want to call out something specifically around the benefits for building owners as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the real estate community is, you know, set to benefit from these, or should be set to benefit from this type of a program.
I would agree. And I think building on that, I'm guessing that a lot of this will fall in commercial buildings. We should also think about their procurement strategies for hiring minority businesses to do the work.
That sounds like two different goals to me. Does that? So what Kirk, what you mentioned, would it make sense to say ensure all classes of building owners, or ensure energy burden is also reduced for building owners as well as tenants? I'm wondering if it's a separate one or if it's something.
I'm going to look to the brokers in the room to help you wordsmith that, but it seems to me that commercial real estate, regardless of the segment.
And these, of course, don't have to be our final wordsmithing as well. We can definitely grab some of your feedback, you know, directly in between this meeting and the next one, so that we can make sure that these are kind of in a space that we like the language. And Kara, I don't want to miss what you just said. It looks like perhaps we've got someone adding it right here.
That could also, this is Kathy, that could also be covered under the workforce section as well.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue. Why don't we just move down into workforce and talk about that one really quick. So we obviously provide a trained workforce from Colorado. We need workforce training for this new class of buildings. A lot of expertise is about to retire from the construction industry, and more training than ever is needed. Train and provide tools that contractors, project originators, et cetera, can use to develop projects. We have that workforce is critical to the success of this plan, and workforce, keep in mind the large impacts of workforce and ensure a just transition.
Julia, this is Kathy again. I would point out on workforce, there's really two different focuses for workforce. One are the people who are going to be doing this installation, But second, will be those building engineers who need to make sure they're trained up in order to use all this new technology. I'm hearing from my members that, they're concerned that that they won't be utilizing this new equipment to its full benefit because they don't really know how. So we need to not only train the people who are installing it, but then train the people who are using it to make sure they're getting the biggest benefit out of it.
Okay.
And this is Karen, and I have technology issues, so I didn't put this in, but I'd love to see the community colleges have curriculum for folks. There's been a big push to get folks who they don't need to go into debt to go to college. This would be a perfect sort of different fields associated with this industry. So I don't know if we could work with community colleges to get curriculum or high schools. I mean, we have Pitkins Tech and Aurora. They would, surely they could leverage this.
I'm having a little bit of a brain bubble on the right wording here, but we'll get it sorted out.
Yeah, to add on to what Karen said, I know there are a number of associations who have training as well, like the Rocky Mountain Mechanical and Plumbing Contractors. Michael, I believe AGC has some training. So, the more training we can get from everybody, the better off we're going to be.
Great. Yes, absolutely.
It's a little bit different, but here at Colorado State University, just in our facilities management, we just created internship programs, like a hiring where like we're going to hire someone as an intern, but it's really designed to be a 4-year transition between internship training to professional position to do some of this district energy systems at the university. It's really a job for a lifetime if a person wants it and aspires to it. But so as an employer, I'm saying, not as an educator in this case, but as an employer, we created our own, right, to develop our own workforce. So there are certain large employers that might provide that type of pathway as well. But maybe there's a framework that someone can develop that helps other large employers to develop their own on-the-job training, internship to full-time position work, whatever that looks like.
Great, great.
Hi, Jenny, IBEW Local 68. I feel like I need to speak up as of right now.
Yeah, please, Jenny.
68 is doing all we can to organize young. We are in Sheridan High School right now with the pre-apprenticeship program, currently educating 23 juniors and seniors to choose a trade of renewable energy as they leave high school. They do have certain expectations, of course, to fulfill their core education, but as they successfully graduate, they do get to pick their apprenticeship of their choice with already their first year curriculum finished. So Local 68 is reaching out to all high schools, all youngsters anywhere in this state to jump on board with this new training. We do offer a 4-year apprenticeship program, and you do not end up in debt when you are finished. You are working while you are being educated. We are simply here to make sure that we educate and train these youngsters and our current members the correct way. So please, if you have any ideas or any resources to send me into the proper location, do so.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that
If you have
work.
any kids or anybody in your family who needs a job, send them my way.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jenny. And thank you for the work that you're doing on that. And we will dive pretty deep into some workforce programs and, just kind of getting a lot more detailed on what this can look like in in one of our future meetings. So know that we'll do some deep dives on this as well.
Yeah, this is Michael Gifford. I also was having some technical difficulties, so don't have the mirror board up yet, but we have in our partnership with the Home Builders Association, 27 high school programs right now with 2,000 students doing a USDOL approved pre-apprenticeship curriculum. So this would be great to look at adding this kind of newer equipment and more on the installation side than it would be the building maintenance or facility management. But I do note also that the state just ended the Work Act that started in 2015. So it might be nice to have a comment maybe when we talk about the workforce development more specifically, if there might be some renewing of that funding for some of these kind of training programs.
Perfect. Great.
Hi, this is Jeff Gaida. Just one thought is ensuring that the current workforce or those going into that line of work are aware that these changes are coming, and doing some outreach to educate them that, you know, if there's training they need to do, they should start now, I guess.
That's a great point. Thanks, Jeff.
And I just wanted to note that any education in non-English is welcome. If there are folks who can, you know, be trained the trainer so that they can train a workforce in a different language, that would be awesome.
Okay, that's a great point, Karen. I think as well, I want to make sure that we also don't lose that those couple comments from above regarding supporting minority owned businesses as well. So let me just add that in here. Great. Just in the interest of time, I will move us on into talking about the next one, which is, again, kind of a good segue here into an engaged and informed community. So Karen, you mentioned education in multiple languages. We've also got here bringing more people into the conversation by using accessible language to connect building climate, health, and equity. I almost think that itself right there could be a goal, especially if we added multiple languages, make it a little bit bigger so people can see that. We have value in the real estate market through simplified information sharing, communicate the indoor air quality improvements and health benefits. People are educated on the benefits and understand why it matters. And while we bring everyone along, let's try not to allow for too many loopholes or ways to avoid compliance and participation. That's a fantastic one right there. Make sure I didn't lose any down. Whoops, sorry about that. Oh, everything's moving around on me. Oh, yep, and there was one more there. So make use of outreach already underway from Denver, which I think is another great point. So we went ahead and turned that one green into a goal statement of bringing more people into the conversation by using accessible language. And I'm going to add in multiple languages. We'll clean up that language there to make it not so redundant or repetitive, to connect building health and climate equity. Are any of these other ones, should we just make straight into goal statements?
I just had one comment. Accessible means something to some of us, as in deaf, blind, you know, and so I just wondering if we could just say, use a different word, and I would look to my colleagues to maybe find the right one for that. Accessible and, or that just means something else.
And we can
I
certainly
mean inclusive language.
Yeah.
And I guess this is trying to get to meet people where they are. So if there's a thought around that,
I'm trying to think how to frame this as a goal statement for you. But I guess what I'm thinking about is sometimes the challenges of communicating these programs is really kind of broad and trying to hit all different audiences. And I'm just, I'd love to work with this group to maybe have kind of, sector specific communications, or, having our communicate. When I think about accessible, it's like almost using words that are a little bit easier to understand by, using the language of these different groups, whether it's a renter or whether it's a building operator or the like. And I don't know how to frame that as a goal statement, but just being a little bit more specific in our language.
Great. I love that, Kirk.
I would know in Aurora, because we have 160 languages spoken in the schools alone, we use a lot of visuals, a lot of graphics. So pictures are a big key for this. So maybe it's just more visual, fewer words, more pictures. And then of course that goes to the training.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think these, Kirk, does this one kind of hit at what you were saying, create sector specific communications that are accessible to different audiences and meets them where they are at?
Sounds great.
Perfect. I like this one a lot. I wonder if other folks do as well. And maybe this, I'm not sure if this belongs here under education and outreach as much as maybe another area, but I wonder if this is something that we want to make sure isn't lost in our goal statements. While we bring everyone along, excuse me, for those who can't see the screen, while we bring everyone along, let's try not to allow for too many loopholes or ways to avoid compliance or participation.
I'm not meaning to out myself and claim that I wrote it, but I did write it, and I put it here, but I'm saying that I wrote it because I'm going to suggest where we might be able to move it. And
sure.
That in a sense, it could almost even be an equity, because to me, there's some aspect of equity involved there, and that, we're going to get to these goals when we all participate, when everybody is a part of the community, if you will. And so that's the piece where I'm just thinking of, there will be building owners or building types, and where folks will say, oh, it's just too hard, or I can't do it. And I just don't want too many types and people and participants to slip away from the participation.
Appreciate that. Okay, let's move that one up to equity. Or go ahead, Paul, please.
Yeah, I want to add a comment that would be focused on the design community, because when you think about it, the vast majority of these changes we're contemplating are going to be documented, detailed, and permitted through an architect engineer team. So, and of course, the architects engineers have been on this issue and trying to advocate it independently for quite some time. So I'd like a goal somewhere around coordinate with the design community to make sure that those goals are aligned. And by design community, that's engineers and architects. As well as some other consultants who are on the call. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that. Perfect. Again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to move us right through. We've got next one is not engaged in informed community. That belongs down there. But this next one is on cost. So we've got quite a few here. I think there's maybe a couple that might jump out as maybe being able to easily roll into goal statements. Some of these are a little bit more questions or just things to note. But we have like, consider the impact of operating costs of electric systems, reducing costs by adding in flexibility in interim periods, set targets and let building owners decide the best way for their building to get there. Avoid technology specific prescriptive requirements. Align funding from other state programs, DOLA, CHAFA, et cetera, to leverage support for low-income housing. And quite a few others here. So any of these jump out immediately is something that is easily a goal statement.
Julia, I think flexibility would be a good goal in general for this one.
Okay.
A question occurs to me for you. As far as options for compliance, I'm thinking energy efficiency is going to be an obvious one, probably beneficial electrification. What about things like purchasing renewable energy credits or carbon offsets or community solar subscriptions? Are those eligible?
I think that is ultimately up to this task force, actually. My reading of the statute, there's nothing that would prevent us from including those as ways to reach compliance. So I think ultimately that's for this group to determine. And Kim, please correct me if I've got an incorrect assessment there.
Nope, that's correct. Yes. This group is coming up with those options, compliance options, or recommendations, I should say.
One of the things I think I read in the law was it's considering usage at the building, not necessarily usage supplied by the grid. The disconnect I see there is that's really where you'll get the low cost energy. Like in terms of renewables, it's you kind of go big or go home, right? You can spend 8 cents a kilowatt hour for solar on your roof or 2 cents a kilowatt hour for large scale community solar. So if our goal is to reduce costs, we want to provide building owners with access to the lowest cost renewables for that particular metric. REX is another low cost option for them to become in compliance with that. But I'm not sure if that falls on the grid side or on the building side, or if by our interpretation, we can say, yes, virtual net metering under community solar qualifies, renewable energy credits qualifies. Can you share your thoughts and expertise on that?
I think we'll probably have to get into those details in a future discussion. I think right now let's try to focus on the overarching goals, and then I think we'll be able to dive into more of the details in a future meeting about what would qualify as one of those options for a building performance standard.
Julia, if you could go up to that goal statement that you had, though, I think it was building specific or sector-wide at the building level.
Yeah,
you had just said that you had just showed the 7% savings.
Sector-wide, at the building level, yeah. So
Yeah.
up here.
Yeah, reduce emissions to meet stakeholders. So is that 7% sector-wide at the building level, right?
Sector-wide for building emissions, correct.
But at the building footprint, is that, I guess that's Joel's that's what Joel's looking for clarification on.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that the emissions are accounted for that we're specifically looking at are emissions from buildings. So those would be both scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, i.e. the emissions that are both coming from grid energy use as well as on-site combustion of fuels. So that would both fall under that building sector.
Can I make a clarification on that? Are we allowed to ignore the fact that the building stock is probably increasing at least 7% in that period of time? Is that per unit of building?
No, I believe that's sector wide. So
But
we would need by
it may
2020.
actually be a more difficult challenge because our growth rate is still pretty high in Colorado.
Correct. Yeah. And that's Kim, is that your assessment as well, that we're, you know,
Yes.
we're not looking? Yeah. Okay, great.
And that brings up a point for me as we're talking about, I'm sure conditioned space versus non-conditioned space would be treated differently. You could still do lighting in non-conditioned space, but just looking at the range of buildings, 50,000 square feet and up, we had to divide it out by 50,000 square feet and up, and then 200,000 square feet and up, you know, for big distribution centers, and not all of it's conditioned space. So that whole flexibility within sectors, it goes by, you know, these buildings size, we may need to have flexibility within size depending on what the use is of the building. So that options for compliance gets pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. You know, and this kind of begs to me the thought that perhaps we should just quickly run through, let's quickly run through these last two. And then I think what we'll do is our team will, in between this and the next meeting, we'll take another look at all of the new ideas that you have added here. We'll try to roll those into goal statements, and then we'll share them with you all between the meetings, so you have time to review them. And then we'll start the next meeting with kind of finalizing them, hopefully through just a quick conversation to make sure that we have the right ones included here. So we have under, just quickly, I'm going to spend like 2 minutes on each of these so that we can get on to the next portion of our conversation today, and let you all know what to expect as we move forward over the coming months. But on Streamlined Process, very quickly, we have you know, quite a few ideas around consistency in terms of rolling this out for different building types, making things actionable, making sure all requirements and targets are within control of the building owner. If you're in the Miro board and you think any of these automatically like sound like a goal statement to you, then I'd encourage you to just click on that sticky note and hit the color there and turn it into a green one so that we can have it as a goal statement. Or if there's something instead that you think is worth including as a goal statement, please add that. Just double click on one of these bigger sticky notes here and add that in. And I love that we have considering green leasing provisions on here. I think that's a great one. And then under reliability, which we've defined as both utility and building functionality, we've got a lot around requirements for achieving the intended outcomes for the general public, fuel switching, just noting that may reduce energy reliability until energy storage is abundant. Electric reliability versus gas reliability must be considered. So I think, you know, right now, none of these to me really look like goal statements that we would use at large, except for perhaps this one. Sometimes this is something that might be good to include: avoiding technology specific requirements, instead using performance targets. Again, that is that kind of goes back to the idea of having options for compliance. I want to make sure that you guys have a chance to take a quick break here. So I'm going to end my screen sharing, but if you're in the Miro board, then you are welcome to continue to add in ideas and thoughts on goal statements here. Let's reconvene in 5 minutes at 2:30. And then we'll kind of go over building performance standards at large, and how we'll be approaching these conversations in our future meetings. And Diane and I will continue to be on through through the break. So if you want to have a conversation or have any questions for us, then always feel free to ask, please.
So Julia, this is Michael. I actually did have a question on one of the last points that we were discussing, or maybe we weren't discussing. I was reading them. So for example, the 7% reduction is in overall stock of buildings 50,000 square feet or more, including any new ones that are added to the mix, if you will. And then is that measuring just at the building, or also the amount of energy that has to be created, say at the utility level, and then through the distribution, if it's, you know, electricity through the distribution lines to the building, you know, the emissions that are being created there. Because if you're switching fuel sources, that's going to be different amounts of emissions depending on how that electricity is being created in the short run versus the long run.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, and Kim, I welcome you to jump in or correct me, but my understanding is that firstly, that the actual the goal for sector-wide reductions is not necessarily limited to buildings over 50,000 square feet. Is that correct, Kim? It's like all buildings?
Well, these building performance standards will only apply to, correct, the covered buildings, those 50,000 square feet or more. Yeah, I guess it's an interpretation of this statute. I guess it is buildings, sector-wide, all buildings, that we need to reduce emissions for 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030. I think the intent was just to reduce emissions in the building sector, not accounting for that, the energy generated at the source. But I can double check on that and get back to you. And I was gonna ask Christine Brinker, but she just stepped away too, since she was one of the authors.
Yeah, maybe we can ping her on it really quick when she gets back. But to that first question, Michael, then, so while only buildings, you know, on the covered building list over a certain size are included in the BPS requirements, all buildings are included in that measure of emissions reductions. So really something we need to consider is, you know, if only buildings that are covered meet that 7% reduction, we will not meet the goal of the statute. Because there are other buildings outside of those that are covered that are included in that final goal. And that's kind of how it was written in the statute.
Although separately over here is a previous statute from 2019 telling the AQCC to reduce those numbers. So nothing would stop them from addressing other parts of the built environment. Independently from what we're doing is what I'm assuming, to reach that. But that would be helpful to know, because I'm just thinking in a real practical sense, if we were to take a building and convert it to all electric energy for heating, for example, and there was a certain reduction in emissions, but that increased demand of electricity caused the creation of that electricity to be from a fossil fuel, for example, then, but we don't have to worry about that. We just have to worry about what comes from the building. And that's a separate rulemaking or a separate discussion in the short and long term, where the electricity comes from. Is that what I'm hearing, or that's what we're gonna ask Christine when she comes back?
That is my understanding. But again, let's double check with Christine.
Hopefully that's not too much in layperson's term. So there's other task force members that could say that in a much more. Bill Green, I see you smiling. I'm doing a really bad job here, but that's just something that occurred to me, that it's not in a vacuum that we could switch systems, because the energy has to come from some other place.
Yeah, and one point is that if we were to switch to electric heating today, greenhouse gas emissions for big buildings would probably increase. Eventually they will decrease, but the carbon content of the grid is kind of dirty right now, and we'd increase emissions. So
yeah,
I
we
might
have that.
like to compare studies as we go along. I had seen not one, but multiple studies showing that the emissions benefits are in our favor for immediately switching. In other words, that our grid here in Colorado was clean enough already. And then of course, only continuing to get cleaner, such that a switch to heat pumps would save emissions.
And Christine, a switch to heat pumps would save emissions, but most large buildings can't switch to heat pump. You know, we did a study of 75 buildings in Colorado, large ones, and only 4 could switch to heat pump. And so if you do electric resistance heating, it's going to be 2030 before you're going to save greenhouse gas emissions. So
I agree.
Bill, is
Yeah.
that because of thermal envelope, or why? What can you say more?
no,
about that?
it's because the existing buildings have high temperature heating systems that are not conducive to heat pumps. You know, heat pumps can only produce a certain temperature. And certainly you can, if you have a higher temperature source, maybe you can get a little bit higher temperature, but you know, you're not going to convert 1801 California to heat pump. You just can't do it. And so most of your big buildings can't do it.
Christine, go ahead, and then I want to kind of, unfortunately, like divert us back to the rest of our conversation today. But
fortunately or unfortunately. Okay, thanks. Bill,
Sorry
that
about
brings
that.
up a point that I wanted to mention, and it's kind of overarching. And I think that we are getting into a lot of the weeds of heat pump technology and readiness and cost. And I think there's a heck of a lot of options that building owners could pursue before needing to switch out a heating system. And so I think we would want to design our recommendations in a way that doesn't require an immediate switch of a heating system. In other words, allow building owners to figure out the best way that would work for their buildings from a whole bunch of other efficiency options.
Sure. Yeah.
And Kirk just had a really quick question, Bill, whether that also considers the new 2021 IECC building codes, your statement there.
Well, I think it's independent of what the code says. You know, the issue deals with existing buildings versus new buildings, and so certainly IECC 2021 would be new buildings, and you can electrify a new building quite easily. But existing buildings are a big issue. So
Absolutely.
how you switch them, you know, it's going to be costly. And yeah, you can do lighting retrofits, you can do envelope retrofits, you can save energy, but you know, the electrification issue is not necessarily the be all end all to get emission reductions.
Great. Thanks for that, Bill. And really quick, Jenny, your hand is up, and it was up before, so I apologize if you recently raised it, but I saw it up for a little while. So just want to make sure I didn't miss anything from that you wanted to share. Okay, we'll assume that. And thank you all for that. I think this is a really great conversation, and it really gets into a little bit more of the detail that we'll be discussing at our future meetings. So please know that this won't be lost. This part of the conversation here, we won't lose it. We'll pick it up again as we start to dive in a lot more detail. But in the last 25 minutes or so of our conversation together here today, we want to just provide you with a little bit of framing on what we'll be discussing, and then how we'll be approaching those topics for future meetings. So Diane, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick screen share. Perfect. And I'll pass it over to you to discuss really quick, Diane.
Does that look good, Julia?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, I usually have to switch it. So thanks. Great. So as we talked about in the beginning of this meeting, we want to level the playing field for everybody to understand, what we're talking about, and also for the people that hop in on these calls to really understand. So we wanted to just make this piece really clear, the difference between benchmarking and BPS. And so when we talk about benchmarking, that's a lot of where communities begin. And it's really just that process of measuring and comparing building energy use to either other similar buildings or the same facility, or just other reference points that are available. And then so a lot of the times then communities will start with that benchmarking phase and then add BPS to that process. And so BPS is then more of a policy, and there's requirements around those policies to really meet those building performance standards and really just improving over time. So we wanted to make that clear, that there's a difference between those. And so that's what we're building as a group throughout this process. So Julia will get into this in a lot more detail in future slides, but really just the nuts and bolts are what we're doing together is, implementing those policy goals and programs. And then, buildings will have to do those energy assessments, data collection, collect all those metrics. And then there's a rating and reporting process. And then there could be penalties or process improvements for those building owners. So this is happening, nationwide in all throughout the United States, but in different levels. And so we want to reiterate that there's not a one size fits all. So that's what part of this conversation is as well. We have plenty of lessons learned from other areas, but we want to make it work for Colorado. So this infographic just kind of shows what's happening across the United States and who is adopting those building performance standards, and just knowing that those goals are based on research, building stock, and stakeholder engagement, and many other parameters. So we just wanted to make that clear and understand that there's many components that go into it, and we'll work together to make it work in Colorado. And finally, I showed this slide last time, but just making it clear that we also have some great lessons learned in Colorado. I know you all brought up, aligning with Denver's goals. We can also look to Boulder and Fort Collins, and just, I know those aren't BPS, they're more benchmarking, but it's still lessons learned about what's working and what's not working with our fellow colleagues and along the Front Range. So this will all be in the PowerPoint, and I know we sent them out as pre-work as well, but just really quickly wanting to set that stage so that we, as we use these terminology, we're all on the same page, because we all come from different backgrounds and understanding. So next, we're going to really dive deep into what makes up a building performance standard. And if there's no questions, I will hand it over to Julia.
Are there any questions on kind of the difference between benchmarking and BPS and the specific components that we'll be focusing on as a task force? Great. And I know as Diane mentioned, we sent out some information about what Boulder is doing around their performance ordinance. Denver's has a benchmarking ordinance, and then, as Katrina mentioned at the top, the Energized Denver Task Force has developed building performance standards recommendations that are very likely to see adoption here in the near future. So Denver will have a BPS very likely soon, but not currently active. And then Fort Collins has more of a benchmarking around water and energy program going on. So those are just 3 locally in the state. When we meet next month, we will be diving a little bit more into kind of the other BPS that are nationally going on, that comparing and contrasting some of those different approaches in terms of some of the elements that you see on the screen here right now. So the buildings that are covered, the metrics, the targets, et cetera, et cetera. Christine, thank you for putting that in the chat. So she's noting that her reading of the state statute is that we need to hit 7% greenhouse gas savings by 2026 and 20% by 2030 in covered buildings, not all buildings. So between this meeting and the next meeting, we will verify which it is, just so we can make sure that we know which goal we're working towards. It will make a difference, I think, in terms of how aggressive we need to be, whether we're looking at covered buildings or all buildings. But if that's your understanding, then that's great. We'll confirm that before we meet again. So Diane, if you want to roll over to the next slide. So in our fourth meeting, we'll be discussing the buildings that are covered. So this is not something that the task force really actually has the opportunity to make any change on. It's defined in state statute as those large commercial multifamily and public buildings that are over 50,000 square feet. There are some exceptions for different building types, including especially those that are unheated, like airport hangars and warehouse spaces. And buildings where more than half of the gross floor area is used for manufacturing, industrial, or agricultural purposes. Single family homes, duplexes, and triplexes over 50,000 square feet are also not included in the building performance standards requirements. There is a covered building list on CEO's website. It is regularly being updated, so it may change over time. Right now, there's nearly 8,000 buildings on the list. That may change as more are added. But during meeting 4, we'll actually have Overlay Consulting, who is supporting the Energy Office in the rollout of the benchmarking program, come and share a little bit more about the covered buildings that are included. And then Iconergy will also share some of that benchmarking data that we have so far, which is great. Next slide, thank you. So another component that we'll be discussing, we'll start to dive into this in our third meeting, is the metrics that we want to use around building performance standards. So this slide, the last slide, and the next few are just the different elements that we'll be diving into in our future conversations to really start to identify what our BPS for Colorado will look like. The metrics are an incredibly important component of this. So the metric is essentially what type of value and measurement are we using to determine whether the BPS has been successful. So we can look at things like energy use intensity. There's a source EUI, which includes the elements of where the energy is produced. There's site EUI, which looks just at what's happening in the building. We can look at greenhouse gas intensity. We can look at using something like the Energy Star Portfolio Manager as a metric. We could do a combination of these. So there's a lot of different options, and the box on the right really shows what other communities and even the state of Washington has determined will be most useful in terms of EUI. Denver is using site EUI as well for their building performance standards. So that's something that we might want to consider is aligning also what's being used already within the state. But we'll dive into that quite a bit more in our next meeting. The next one is targets, which is obviously built right off of metrics. So once we know what our metric, we can't define our targets until we know what we're measuring. So in meeting 4, we'll start to dive into the targets. I want to say that I don't think that we'll have a final determination on all of these necessarily in the meetings that we have listed where we'll discuss them. But those are when we'll really start to dive in deep to them. And we'll talk about how we'll kind of build our building performance standards as a collaborative and iterative approach based on the different conversations that we'll have as well. So we'll get into that in just a minute here. But the targets, could include things like a reduction in EUI or greenhouse gas intensity, obtaining a certain portfolio manager score, obtaining a certain percentage change from the baseline. Those are all different targets that could be used for our BPS. We also want to look at interim targets. I think that'll be a very important component of this conversation as well, because we want to make sure that we are providing opportunities for building owners to understand where they're going and how they're going, how they're going to get there and what an incremental approach might look like. For timeline, this is also already established in the state statute for our sector-wide emissions reductions, but there isn't a discrete timeline for compliance. So that's something that we'll want to discuss and consider. The benchmarking reporting deadline right now is June 1st of every year. So that's something to consider as we start to discuss timeline. Obviously, the use of those interim targets can also come into play, and we can discuss further phasing together as a group as well. And then in terms of penalties, again, this one is already defined in state statute. So there are limits for the amount of cost that can be prescribed for different violations of performance standards based on what, whether this is the first or second or further violation. And that those penalties will be remitted to the state treasurer into the Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. So we really don't have as a group the opportunity to, to change what's already in state statute in terms of those penalties, but we can certainly allow those to inform our conversation around compliance pathways and timeline and phasing. And Kirk, I saw your hand go up and then down. Did you have a question?
I had a question on the previous slide, but I think we're going to get into these in more detail. When we say sector-wide emissions, hopefully we'll just kind of dive into the intent of that kind of phrasing a little bit more. And then I did have on your next slide. So the penalties shall not exceed the 2,000 or the 5,000. Are we able to recommend interim penalties?
That's a great question.
Check on that. I don't know yet.
Okay, so we will have an answer for you at the next meeting for that one.
Can I have a definition? Hi, this is Bill Martin. What's the definition of a public building?
Oh, that's a great question. I believe a public building, and I will again look at state statute and make sure that we share that out so that there's we're all clear on it. But public building would be one owned by a local government or special district entity.
So schools.
Yep, schools are
I'll copy
public.
the definition into the chat.
Yeah, churches. I'd be curious what that definition is.
Great.
I think the statute defines what is not covered, but it doesn't. I don't know if it defines.
We do have a definition of public building.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And so that Kim will add that to the chat, and then we'll also get that into monday.com. So we have that there.
And
Paul,
Julia, for this one, the Climate Mitigation Adaptation Fund, is this group making a recommendation on how the money will be? Like, are we making program recommendations here? Or?
No, that won't be a part of this process. That would be fun.
Okay. What is our role then for penalties collected?
Really, if we'll check into whether we have the opportunity around interim, setting any sort of interim penalties. So we'll look into that. If that is the case, then that's certainly something that this group can discuss and set if we feel it's appropriate. Other than that, it's really more about this, informing our conversation around compliance pathways, interim timelines, and any programs that we might want to suggest in order to help building owners meet these targets.
But nothing specific to the fund itself.
Correct. Paul, and then Katrina, and then Christine.
Thanks, Julie. I think I saw this on a previous slide, but I just want to confirm for everybody that the baseline against which the reductions will be measured is going to be Energy Star median for that building type. Is that correct? Did I understand that?
I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean, Energy Star? Sorry.
Target finder.
Oh.
Yeah, benchmarking we'll understand, but the critical thing about benchmarking is what's the baseline against which you're measuring the reduction. So I just want to make sure I understand where we're pinning that baseline.
The statute notes that the baseline will be 2021 energy use data. So we're not going to have that, obviously.
Yeah, so maybe this is
I
a key
under,
conversation. This is going to be really important.
my understanding is it'll be based on benchmarking data which uses Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but it wouldn't necessarily be the Energy Star score. It would just be the program. And since we won't have the first year of statewide benchmarking data as we're creating our recommendations, I think we'll have to look to existing benchmarking data from Denver, Boulder, and Fort Collins, which cover about a third of the buildings, and extrapolate from there or supplement with other sources.
We could also use the CBEX data specific for our climate zone.
And then that's what I was guessing too, if we're going to use CBEX, but okay. And can I just put in a quick plug? I think we need to be thinking about site EUI. A GHGI across the whole state, I think, introduces so many problems because we have so many different utilities with very different GHG rates. So anyway, that's my question.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. Katrina, go ahead.
Just one question on penalties. Are those one-time penalties or annual penalties?
I believe they are annual, so they can be assessed for each violation. That's a good question. Great. Okay, I'm gonna cruise us through these last couple. Programs like penalties programs we'll discuss much more in meeting 9. So those kind of both are informed by obviously the building performance standards that we select and conversations around workforce, which will be meeting 8. So Dan, I think I'll pass it back over to you. Oh, you might be muted.
Sorry, it's so confusing when I share my screen. Okay, real quick. So, I don't know if you're all feeling overwhelmed, but we are all in this together and we have plenty of time to work towards these goals. So we just wanted to share with you, we set the syllabus in monday.com. So if you have not seen that, please feel free to email us and I can email it straight to you. So what we've tried to do is then break down, all those components of the BPS so that we can have conversations about each of those components into future meetings. We'll also be working closely with Iconergy on data collection and understanding those pieces so that we're making, really great decisions around these different components of the BPS. So not only will we have these monthly meetings, we also do have monday.com, and I have a slide quick just to cover like what can and cannot be discussed there, but please use that as a resource to ask questions and stay engaged in between meetings. And then towards, quarter 1 and quarter 2 of, it doesn't have to wait till then, but quarter 1 and quarter 2 of next year, we'll also be engaging our constituencies and, involving the public in this process as well. So with all of those different tools we have, you all be able to, make the best decisions possible towards the Colorado BPS. So were there any initial thoughts or concerns around the syllabus? You can either share now or just write on the thread in the monday.com board if you had any input or thoughts.
Maybe just in the interest of time, we'll ask you to share any thoughts in the monday.com board, or feel free to email us. We certainly want to make sure that we are covering everything that makes sense. I know today a lot of things have come up that we'll dive into in more detail in future conversations. If needed, we can always look at extending these meetings a little bit. I know that when you guys worked on this, I know your meetings were 3 hours each. We want to be respectful of everyone's time and limit the amount of time that we're sitting on Zoom, but we also want to make sure that we are accomplishing everything. So we can always look at if we need to extend our time together on our monthly meetings as well.
Yeah, and to that point, Julia, I think it's, also great to just reach out to questions to me, Julia, or Kim, and then we can capture all those and then share, because some folks have asked some great questions and then we can bring that to the whole group at our meetings too. So please use this as a resource. But then quickly, I just wanted to, I think we'll skip that slide for now, but I just quickly wanted to dive into monday.com. And so the way we can use that is to share meeting materials. We'll share the pre and post resources. And it is an opportunity to connect between meetings. We cannot have like, you know, I'm sure you remember from meeting number 1, what cannot happen, but you're welcome to ask questions and add resources and things like that to that platform. If you have any questions about using monday.com, if you haven't been able to get in there or it's not user friendly to you, I'm more than happy to meet with you and dive deeper in there. So I'll pass it back over to you, Julia.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next meeting, we'll be talking a little bit more about establishing the boundaries for our BPS and starting to look at targets. So we're hoping to have a presentation from folks over at the Institute for Market Transformation and the New Buildings Institute for them to really speak to some of the different BPS standards that have been used across the country and kind of pros and cons of different approaches and why certain things have worked better than others or why certain things work in a certain community but not in another community. So we encourage you prior to that meeting to share with us any questions that you might have with those folks. So we'll add a line item to monday.com for you to add in any of those questions. Before we meet next time, we'd love for you to review meeting minutes and the working document. So one thing that we didn't go into detail, but our goal is to basically work together to develop the final building performance standards in an iterative fashion, in an iterative document. So what that means is that between meetings, our team will be working to put all of the information that we hear from you and all of the feedback and input that you've provided into a Google document in order to make sure that we are staying in line with open meetings, requirements and an open law, records law, then we will not be able to allow you to make changes to the working document, but you can share with us any questions you have or comments or anything. But basically this document will be sort of a running record of everything that we have found to date in terms of our conversations together. At the beginning of each meeting, we'll go back and revisit what we discussed in the last meeting, and we will confirm everything. So, for example, at the beginning of next meeting, the first thing that we'll touch on is confirming the goals that we've talked about today. So between now and the next meeting, our group will work to start that working document, get it out to all of you. It will have those goals listed on it. And you will have a chance to review those and to share feedback with the group on or with us on those goals. And then we'll share that feedback with the whole group, and we'll start the meeting with kind of confirming what those goals will be for our final work together. And then next meeting, we will, as I said, dive into establishing those boundaries. We'll have those presentations. We'll have a few items for you to review prior to that meeting, a EPA document and a document from ACEEE. And then we'll dig into those presentations from Institute for Market Transformation and New Building Institute to really help us to understand kind of the different perspectives and the different approaches that we can take. Following that, we'll meet in meeting 4, and we'll start to really dive into the benchmarking data that we have available, probably looking perhaps at some CBEX data as was noted as well, and diving into really starting to develop our own standards. Yes, and that's a great question, Kara. We can certainly have time to just continue that discussion on what the statute requirements are. So between now and the next meeting, we'll also make sure that we are very clear on that and share that out with this group on monday.com and put it in the working document as well.
And you all asked great questions today too, so we'll be sure to get those answered for you, and we'll add them to the meeting minutes. And then just one last thing quick, not to overwhelm you, but we just wanted you to start thinking now a little bit about public engagement. So I'll post these questions in monday.com, but it'll just be important for us to consider the timeline, the process, and the resources needed for you all to be successful in reaching out to your communities in this process. So that'll be something we'll kind of be thinking about in the back of our minds leading up to, like I said, quarter 1, quarter 2 of our process. So again, you'll see those in monday.com, and I'll add them to the notes as well.
Perfect. And I know we are at time, so I want to let you all free to the wolves if you'd like to jump off, but also our team will continue to stay on here for a few minutes. So, so if you have anything else you want to discuss, please, now is the time.
I have a request of our gracious hosts, if I could. So I have no idea what the types of energy uses that covered buildings entail, right? I think we intuitively all know that lighting and HVAC would be part of it. Is that really what we're targeting? Is what we know? Or is there a possibility that you can give us some more information on the types of energy applications within these covered buildings? Because I feel like I need that type of information to make a more informed decision in this process.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think perhaps that's something Jeff, maybe your team might be able to dive into a little bit more when we kind of talk about some of the data that's available. But you know, one thing to note would definitely be that our state statute does note that any sort of like any building where, again, more than 50% of the floor area is devoted to manufacturing, industry, or agriculture is excluded. So any sort of like heavy industry is very likely not going to be a part of what we're addressing here as a group. I think definitely like lighting loads and heating loads are a large component of what we're considering. But Jeff, feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts initially.
Yeah, we'll review that and try to include some of that information in our reporting in December. So
yeah, that'd be great. If we could add that to the agenda for maybe the baseline meeting in December, I think that'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
You know, along those same lines, thinking about EV charging infrastructure and adding loads to this building and adding loads to a building, how that, how portfolio manager addresses that, and also how that would impact, you know, these targets as well.
Good point. Yeah, I wonder too, I know the whole group's not here, but I can make like a monday.com item that we can start adding these things of what information do we need to be successful in making these decisions so that they can be shared across the team here. So great. I think that's really important.
One question, if there is one source that would tell us through the state school districts who has a curriculum, or through, I don't know if there's a way to put all that in a document to see what's out there. I think it was Jennifer had some good points about their working with folks, but if there is a document that already has that information in it, I'd love to have that posted.
Yeah, we can do some digging. Preliminarily, I've been talking to Larimer County Front Range Community College, and they have some great curriculum and resources there, but I think that'll be good to compile.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. Again, we can remain on for a couple more minutes, but if you don't have any other questions or comments, then feel free to hop off, enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be in touch very soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And I'm getting clarification from Will on we don't have a good clarification on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We have differing takes in the office.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of what I
assumed.
I was like, I'll get back to you.
I don't know.
Yeah, when I write the meeting notes, I'll just ping you and we'll make sure, because I think there was another one that we said we'd get back about too. So I just wrote all of them down.
Covered buildings versus all buildings. Yeah.
Yep.
That sector goal, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, sector wide.
Yeah, great. Great. Well, we will work on getting those notes